Hey there, welcome to a video discussing the general strategies for the PSAT exam, which also could be applied towards the SAT exam. So here we're going to discuss pages 1.6 through 1.9 in your PSAT binder. If you go to the first tab, you'll definitely see those pages there. So if we start with strategy 1, make a mess, what's meant by that strategy is that you're encouraged to make a mess out of your test booklet. When you take the PSAT or SAT and the proctor gives you the booklet, feel free to write all over the booklet. Of course, you can't keep it, but you are encouraged to write all over it. So a way you could apply the strategy for all questions: circling correct answers, crossing out incorrect answers, placing a check mark by possible answers, and circling skipped questions. These are all things you can do for any question on the SAT or PSAT. You might be already using or already be doing this and using this strategy, which is great. If you don't, I'd encourage you to try it. Basically, what I'm asking you to do is to transfer anything that you've worked in your head down to paper. Let's look at the next bullet point. So how can you apply a strategy for more specific sections or specific question types? Well, for reading, you could fill in the blanks for sentence completions, because sentence completions are contained in the reading section. Or the actual reading itself, you could circle the reference material, like circling certain lines that are referred to by some questions, or underlining certain lines, stuff like that. For math, you could draw figures for geometry questions. That could work, because if they describe a certain geometry problem, it might help to draw a diagram so you can visualize the problem. And even if they give you a diagram but they say it's not drawn to scale, it might be better to redraw it so that it's written, so it's drawn in a more proper fashion. For math problems, try working problems out on paper, not in your head. Because what will happen sometimes when you do too much math in your head, you can make careless errors or might not be able to keep track of everything they have worked out. So it's better just to work problems out on paper, not in your head. And finally, for the writing section, try revising sentences containing errors. Like, how would you rewrite it in your own words? Then you can look at the choices for like the improving sentence questions and pick the correct answer. Or for the identifying error questions where you just have to identify a mistake, it's still nice to revise the sentences just so you feel comfortable picking the choice that does have an error. Pace yourself. Remember, this is a timed exam, so you got to be aware of your pacing. So don't read directions, because that's a waste of time. Even if a proctor tells you to, simply ignore him or her and just go straight to the questions. Plus, you already know what the directions are because you've done a practice test, and that was actually a real test from 2008. And a lot of the practice problems will have the directions there already, so you already know what they are. Don't waste your time doing that. Another thing to keep in mind is answering easy and personal easy questions first. Remember, the questions do go in order of difficulty. So don't try doing the ones at the end first. Always go in order for like the math and grammar sections of how the questions are presented to you. So start with number 1 and go through that. But of course, there are some sections, as you'll see when you cover the format of the test, where easier questions follow after the hard questions. So keep that in mind as well. So definitely you want to make sure you're doing any easy questions first. Actually, I could even show you right now. There's one math section that goes 1 through 8, multiple choice, and then 9 through 18 grid ends. You're probably better off skipping 7 and 8 and do 9 through 11 before you do 7 and 8. So keep that in mind. And what I mean by personal easy, if you have any preferences, if there are any types of math concepts you just totally despise, like you hate geometry, then maybe a hard algebra question would be easier for you than an easy geometry question. All depends what your preferences are. Don't waste 5 minutes on one hard question when you can answer 3 or 4 easy questions the same amount of time. That's especially true for this math section. But don't waste time on number 8 if you can knock out 9 through 11 in the same amount of time. Or for even the grammar section. Actually, that's not quite right there. But sometimes you might have like 3 or 4 hard improving sentence questions, like 17 through 20 of the writing section. But numbers 21 through 24 could be easier. And it really drives the point home. Every correct answer is worth roughly 10 points toward your scaled score. So just because a question is harder than another question doesn't mean you get more credit for it. It's all the same. Be analytical. This is also an important technique. You want to analyze the difficulty level of each question. So for strategy 3, we want to be analytical. So what that means is you want to analyze the difficulty level of each question. So if a question is at the beginning, then you know it's not going to require much time or effort. If it's in the middle, some time or effort. At the end, of course, lots of time or effort. So it means that the answer to these questions can be quite predictable. What I mean by predictable is not like you'll know what the answer is, but you'll know, again, what's an appropriate amount of time and effort to spend on the question. Say, for example, you're spending lots of time and effort on an easy question, then you're probably over analyzing it, so you're treating the question harder than you're supposed to. So you might want to skip it, come back to it later. Hopefully come back to it later, you can view it with a different perspective. On the flip side, let's say you're answering a hard question with very little time and not much effort. Then you might be oversimplifying it or treating it easier than you're supposed to and could be falling for a trap. So when that happens, you kind of want to look at the problem again and realize, okay, what am I doing wrong here? This should be a little bit more challenging. I shouldn't be getting the answer too quickly. So these are just little things you can do for some question types. When you're using a strategy, you always want to ask yourself the following 3 questions. What number am I on? So that way you can tell if it's an easy, medium, or hard question. Which concept of grammar rule is being tested? Are they talking about like geometry? So maybe I should use some of the rules from geometry. Or if they're talking about subject-verb agreements, you want to keep that in mind. And how will I approach a question? And we'll talk about many different approaches for lots of question types throughout this course. Let's look at this example here. This is a 16 question section for math. You're on number 10. So this will probably be a medium level question. So it won't be too easy, but it shouldn't be too hard. So maybe it might take us a minute to solve. Concept being tested, looks like they're talking about inequalities. And also probability. So whatever knowledge you have about that, you'll want to utilize that knowledge to help you solve the problem. Strategy I should use, there are some fancy strategies like substituting for variables, working backwards, other stuff. But in this case, I would just solve for x and find the probability. That's what I would do for this one. So if I solve for x, 2x is less than 10, x is less than 5, that's for the first inequality. For the second inequality, x is greater than negative 11. So x is in between negative 11 and 5. Now looking at the set here, of course only 2 of those numbers satisfy that inequality. So there probably has to be 2/5. So that wasn't too bad. But again, that's what you want to generally go through when you do each math question, even some of the writing questions too. Even sentence completions, you can use this rule, use this strategy, because if it's a hard sentence completion, there should be a hard word. If it's an easy sentence completion, it should be an easy word. Okay, let's move on to strategy 4, double pass elimination. So here we're talking about process elimination. So double pass elimination technique is pretty simple. You do 2 passes. The first pass is for eliminating incorrect answers. The second pass is for selecting the correct answer. This is great to use for non-math questions, but also can be applied towards math questions. And there'll be a particular math strategy we'll talk about where you'll consistently use process elimination. And there's a phrase that you'll see in these math questions where you'll know to use process elimination. Before we do the examples below, just keep in mind that there is a faulty strategy that some students use when taking multiple choice tests, and that would be looking for the correct answer right away and then just moving on. So never eliminating any choices. That's not a good idea because it's not just your job to pick the right answer, it's also your job to make sure that the other 4 choices are in fact incorrect. That way you have more confidence in your answer. There is a thing called a 2 of 5 rule, and what that states is that for every 5 choices, or for every question that has 5 choices, 3 will be bogus, 1 will be correct, and 1 will be trap. So it means that you expect 2 out of 5 to seem legitimate, where of course 1 is correct and 1 is there to trick you, meaning that the other 3 will be completely out of left field. Not all questions follow this rule, but generally most do. So if you look at number 1, this is a sentence completion, so it should be easy. So I'm using the being analytical strategy, so I know the correct answer should be an easy word. And we're placing each foot first cautiously, or making the ascent cautiously, so we want a word that's synonymous to cautious. Heavily, clumsily, and confidently are obviously not synonymous to cautious. Tentatively could be. Languidly is a tough word, but remember it's a number 1. So I'd probably go C, because I'm comfortable with C. I know what it means. Being tentative means holding back a little bit, or just not being so sure about something. That would be the right choice. Languidly means being sort of like tired or lazy. But even if you didn't know what it meant, that seems to be a bit too hard for a number 1. Even for math, you can use a strategy. They're saying, or asking you to find the slope. Well, looking at the line, now it's going to have a negative slope, so I eliminate C, D, and E. Those are my bogus answers. If you weren't sure about slope, you could be confused about A or B. If you weren't sure if it was rise over run or run over rise. Well, it is rise over run. You go down 1 over 3, so it's got to be B. So A was maybe a trap. Maybe you thought this was really easy. I don't know, but the answer is B for that one. So you could use process elimination for some of these problems without actually calculating the slope. Lastly, for educated guesses. The golden rule for guessing on this exam is if you can eliminate at least 1 choice, you are encouraged to guess. That does seem like a very daunting thing to do if you eliminate just 1 choice, but let's look at this demonstration down below. If you were to randomly guess, because of the penalty is 1/4 for every question, if you were to randomly guess, the odds are out of 100-something questions on the PSAT or SAT, you get 1 out of every 5 right and 4 out of every 5 wrong. Add up all those points, 1 for the correct answer, -1/4 for each of the incorrect answers. That comes out to 0. That's why the penalty is -1/4 for missing 5 choice multiple choice questions on the SAT or PSAT. The College Board wants to discourage you from random guessing. But if you eliminate just 1 choice and then randomly guessed, the odds are you get 1 out of every 4 right, 3 out of every 4 wrong. Now, your raw score goes up by a 1/4 point for every 4 questions. It's a small gain, but nevertheless, it is a gain. So you're encouraged to guess if you eliminate at least 1. And of course, if you eliminate 2 or 3 choices, the odds of getting the question right are even better. But when you do eliminate a choice, you gotta be 100% sure that it is wrong. Never get rid of grid-in questions. Sorry, never omit grid-in questions because they don't penalize you for those. You only get penalized for multiple choice. So don't leave those blank. Even though you have to get very lucky to get those right if you were to guess. And the 3 conditions in which it is okay to omit, if you run out of time, because we don't want you to randomly guess. If you can't eliminate any choices, then leave it blank. Like say it's a really hard sentence completion. Like if you didn't know what any of these 5 words had meant in this example, then sure, leave it blank. And lastly, anything outside your score range. Your instructor will be able to help you determine what your precise score range will be based upon your first practice test. Like say you got a 45 in the math section, and you're hoping to get up to like 55 or 60, then you don't need to answer all the questions. You could probably deliberately leave some of the questions blank at the end. Like say this math section right here, maybe don't do 15 through 20. Do 1 through 14. Spend more time on those questions and leave those blank, because if you're aiming for 55 or 60, you don't have to get all the questions right. So in that case, you can use a bit of strategy and just focus on the ones that you can handle and leave some blank just so you can get your score up. Because if you were to attempt these last 6, you probably would have to rush to the ones in the beginning to get to those last 6, and you're probably going to miss the last 6 anyway. So, just using some common sense, sometimes it might make sense to deliberately or on purpose leave some questions blank if you're aiming for a score that's not necessarily in the 70s or a perfect score. So that covers all the general strategies. I'm going to not do 1.10. You'll actually do that in class with your instructor, just to check to make sure that you understand the general strategies. So that's it, and we'll see you on Sunday morning for the PSAT course. Goodbye.